The CIA on the defense this morning over the Senate report on the use of what it calls torture during CIA interrogations. Former Vice President Dick Cheney calls the report, quote, full of crap, and says that the use of enhanced interrogation techniques were justified. Let's bring in Republican Senator Tom Coburn of Oklahoma. He's on the Select Committee on Intelligence. He's also a ranking member on the Homeland Security Committee and a medical doctor. Senator Coburn, great to see you this morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well. So after a blistering report like this is released, there are often calls for someone to be held accountable for what we see in this report. Who do you think is responsible or should be held responsible?
Well, I think first thing ought to be the critique of the report. I was really disappointed. You can't just look at pieces of paper and make the judgments that the committee made. There's no context in this report because nobody was interviewed that had an association with any of this.
Well, the committee says that they couldn't interview CIA operatives because there was an investigation going on, so that they were blocked.
No, they were blocked from interviewing because the Obama administration had threatened to prosecute them. So you can't put them in dual jeopardy. But so therefore you put out a substandard report that doesn't have any context until that had been decided. So the number one goal is to get out a report, whether it's accurate or not. So I don't agree with the assumption of the report. The CIA did a lot of things wrong. There's no question. We all recognize that. I think they've admitted that. They weren't prepared to do this in 9/11. They were handed something to do under the guidance of legal counsel that was granted. So I'm not as upset about that. I'll tell you the number one thing I'm upset about on this report. What are the recommendations for us for the future? When we have another issue, and we're going to have issues like this come again, especially with ISIL and with the world in the shape that it is, what are the facts that need to be learned to guide us to make better decisions in the future? And there's none of that in here.
Wouldn't the Senate committee say that they weren't tasked with that wasn't the point of this report? They were just assessing what happened and getting a full accounting of whether or not those enhanced interrogation techniques did lead to actionable intelligence, or if they were classified as torture, but moving forward, that wasn't their goal.
Well, I think their goal was to say exactly what they said without putting it in context, and that's why I think the report has very little value. I know what the CIA did wrong. I'm privileged to have interviewed many of the interrogators and seen the consequences, and both the fruits and the consequences of their actions. To me, we know we made mistakes as a country following 9/11. I see very little import of this report in terms of how it will guide us for the future, and I think that's the biggest failing. We need help for the future on how are we going to handle these things in the future, and what are we going to learn from the mistakes that we did make. What is it to be learned, and how do we guide that, and how do we give informed knowledge to people making decisions in the future? And to me, we've got it all stirred up about the CIA and torture and everything else. The thing is what do we learn? And I'm just really disappointed that we came to a conclusion that we wanted to come without any contextual insight to it and without any recommendations for the future.
Do you think that the head of the CIA, John Brennan, who was the deputy director from 2001 to 2003, should stay on as the head of the CIA?
I absolutely do. I do. I didn't vote to confirm John Brennan, but I found him to be very honest with me in my dealings in intelligence on the committee, and also to be very straightforward. I've not found that he's been dishonest with me or lied to me or led me astray in any way. And we're aggressive on that committee in terms of double checking what we're told. So I have confidence that I don't think we ought to change in the middle of the stream right now. I think he also has confidence of the team there.
You are well known in Congress as the person who points out all of the wasteful spending. You're sort of the pork slayer, and you will be leaving Congress next year, but not before you've given them one massive report on tax loopholes. What did you find in that report?
Well, I found that we're going to spend $5 trillion over the next 5 years in terms of tax benefits to selected groups of people that may not necessarily be in the best interest of the country in terms of it growing and creating new jobs. We tried not to be real specific about our recommendations, but rather create something that the American people could look at it and read and say, well, where does the money go? For example, home mortgages. You know, everybody says, well, that's a middle class benefit. It's not. 73% of it goes to people making $250,000 more a year. So that's not middle class, that's upper class. And so we have all these false assumptions in the tax codes that say that it's for middle class when it's not. And the whole point of this was to inform where the money's going and whether or not it's accomplishing things that are good for the country.
Well,
my thought would be that we ought to have capital go where it gets the greatest benefit for the most people in this country. And when we pick and choose winners through the tax code, we don't necessarily do a very good job at that. And consequently, we have a lot of people that don't have jobs today and a lot of wealth that's not being created because we've done it.
It's hard to argue with that logic, and those reports are always an entertaining and troubling read. Senator Tom Coburn, thanks so much for joining us on